All the comic books and magazines with a cover date of January 1937 came out in late 1936. The market was now established with 10 monthly titles competing for readers. Which of these would have caught your attention on the newsstand? Let's take an in-depth look at the highlights of every comic with a January 1937 cover date. Detective Picture Stories number 2 came out from Comics Magazine. Overstreet Price Guide notes of the title, all issues are very scarce, and Gerber rates this issue a 7. He features an early appearance of The Clock. This comic book featured the longest running comic strip pages so far in modern comics, with an average of 7 pages per strip. The cover was by William Allison. There was a 7-page story of The Clock from writer-artist George Brenner. The Mastermind was a 7-page story from writer-artist George Merkel. George Merkel was the pseudonym of George Marco, born in 1901. In the late 1930s, his comic book career began using the name George Merkel. His first creation was The Mastermind, which appeared in Detective Picture Stories. Also was in Funny Pages in 1938, Amazing Mystery Funnies in 1938, and Keen Detective Funnies in 1939. The sporadic appearances of the Mastermind suggest the stories were used as fillers. Speed Rush was a 7-page story from writer J.M. Wilcox. And James Milton Wilcox was born July 27, 1895 in Columbus, Ohio. In 1933, his pen and ink story illustrations began to appear in Chicago-based pulp magazines such as the Magic Carpet magazine and Weird Tales, an innovative pulp magazine that featured otherworldly and macabre subjects. The December 1933 issue of Weird Tales has the first published appearance of Robert E. Howard's Conan. Those first illustrations of Conan are by J.M. Wilcox. In 1935, his pen and ink illustrations were published in Thrilling Western. His drawings appeared in Ace Sports, Exciting Western, Western Aces, and Western Trails. In 1937, he began a secondary career drawing comic books for Chesler Studio. He signed most of his work for comics Jim Wilcox. Over the next 2 decades, he drew comics for Centaur, Dell, Fawcett, Gilberton, and Novelty Comics. Clem Bowers was a 7-page story from writer-artist Victor Dowling, who is an American comic book artist from New York. He made features like The Age of Stone, Windy Parks, and Wings of Crime for Centaur Comics. He spent the 40s drawing for Feature Comics and did his final comic book work in the early 50s when he contributed to the Atlas mystery titles Adventures into Terror, Adventures into Weird Worlds, and Uncanny Tales. The Amateur Murderer was a 7-page story from writer-artist Tom McNamara, who is a newspaper cartoonist and an artist for early comic books. His comic strip, Us Boys, was published through the International Feature Service from 1910 to 1928. In the 1920s, he was based in Hollywood and worked as a writer for the Our Gang series by Hal E. Roach Studios and as a director of Mary Pickford in Little Annie Rooney and Sparrows. Between 1935 and 46, he drew for comic books such as New Fun, Buzzy, and All Funny for DC Comics. Famous Funnies number 30, cover dated January 1937, came out from Eastern Color, the longest running continual modern monthly comic book. Featured a cover by Victor Pazmino. Some of the highlights included Alec and Itchy, a story written by Jimmy George and penciled by Merle Mulholland. Merle Mulholland, born in Pennsylvania, June 22, 1898, he created the comic strip Alec and Itchy in 1931, publishing it for a year. He died in 1944. War on Crime appeared again in this issue, a 4-page story from writer Rex Collier, penciled possibly by Kemp Starrett. The crime story was the first crime story ever published in comic books. Napoleon was a 1-page story from writer-artist Clifford McBride. Born January 26, 1901, lived until May 21, 1951. An American cartoonist best known for his comic strip Napoleon and Uncle Elby. He created Elby, a character based on his uncle Henry Elba Eastman. He soon began to add situations involving Elby's dog, Napoleon. McBride began Napoleon as a daily strip on June 6, 1932, reaching a wider audience once he connected with the McNaught Syndicate. His Sunday strip was added in 1933, and the following year, the title was changed to Napoleon and Uncle Elby. McBride's cartoons appeared in such magazines as Life and Cosmopolitan, and he profited from hardcover reprints, comic books, and the licensing of his character as the spokesdog during the 40s for Red Heart dog food. Merchandising included a stuffed toy of Napoleon. Napoleon and Uncle Elby was a 1945 hardcover collecting 116 of McBride's strips. Sky Roads was a 2-page story from writer Dick Calkins and artist Russell Keaton. Keaton was born in Mississippi in 1910. His first comics job was assisting Dick Calkins on the early Buck Rogers and Sky Roads newspaper strips in 1929. He eventually took over the Buck Rogers Sunday page completely from 1930 to 33. In 1939, Russell Keaton got his pilot's license and launched his own strip, Flyin' Jenny, for the Bell Syndicate. He died in 1945 at the young age of 35. Toddy was a 1-page story from writer-artist George Marcoux, who worked on comics during the 30s until he became ill, quitting the business, but then returning in 1942 to begin work with Street and Smith's title Shadow Comics, before creating the boy with the most comics in America, Super Snipe, in 1942. He would draw Super Snipe until his death in 1949. Funland was a 1-page activity from writer-artist A.W. Nugent. Arthur William Nugent, born in 1891, lived until March 25, 1975. Better known as Art Nugent, an American cartoonist notable for his long-running syndicated puzzle feature, Funland, also known as Uncle Art's Funland, which he drew for 4 decades, sometimes using the signature A.W. Nugent. He created Funland in 1933. Along with games, riddles, connect-the-dots art, crossword puzzles, and anagrams, it introduced the autobiographical character Uncle Nugent, aka Uncle Art, distributed by United Feature Syndicate to more than 100 newspapers. In the 40s, he created funny animal stories for Popular Comics and other comics, which also carried Funland reprints. He also had a story in Big All-American Comics from DC in 1944 called Pint-Size Pete. Dickie Dare was a 2-page story from writer-artist Colton Wow. And Wow was born in March 10, 1896 in England, living until May 23, 1973. A cartoonist, painter, teacher, and author, best known for his illustration work on the comic strip Dickie Dare and his book The Comics, published in 1947, the first comprehensive history and analysis of comic strips. The Adventures of Patsy was a 2-page story from writer-artist Mel Graff. His adventure story came from Graff, born 1907, living until 1975, who drew the comic The Adventures of Patsy for Associated Press starting in 1934. Later, Graff succeeded Austin Briggs on the Secret Agent X9 series, which Mel Graff drew the police comic until 1960, syndicated in 130 newspapers. Connie was a 1-page story from writer-artist Frank Godwin, born October 20th, 1889, who lived until August 5th, 1959, an American illustrator and comic strip artist notable for his strip Connie and his book illustrations for Treasure Island, Kidnapped, Robinson Crusoe, Robin Hood, and King Arthur. In 1938, Godwin stepped in to replace illustrator Kemp Sterrett and writer Paul Powell's daily strip Roy Powers' Eagle Scout, the official strip of the Boy Scouts of America, which continued until 1942. He worked on Connie from 1927 to 1944, and then Rusty Riley from 1948 to 59. This issue also featured 2 stories from Al Cap under the alias of Ham Fisher. We had the short Fisher's History of Boxing, copyright the McNaught Syndicate, and also a 1-page Joe Palooka story. Jerry Iger, with the alias Bob Bliss, he gave us a 1-page Queenie strip. Ollie of the Movies was a 2-page story from writer-artist Julian Ollendorf. And Ollendorf was born in Brooklyn, New York, June 14th, 1881. Ollie of the Movies was Ollendorf's longest-running strip from 1934 to 1938. Jane Arden was a 4-page story from writer Monty Barrett with pencils by Russell Ross. This adventure story is copyright the McNaught Syndicate. Russell Ross was assigned to the Jane Arden strip in 1935. The Slim and Tubby character Tubby also switched comics and became Arden's regular side character. Ross drew the Jane Arden strip with text by Monty Barrett until 1952 and continued to draw the strip with the new writer Walt Graham until 1955. Above the Crowd was a 1-page cartoon, non-fiction, from writer-artist Stookie Allen, reprinted from Sports Novel magazine. Benjamin David Stookie Allen, born January 30th, 1903, lived until January 6, 1971, a cartoonist who created the nationally syndicated comic strip Muggsy. He worked on Flapper Fanny during the 30s with his wife Gladys Parker. In addition to Flapper Fanny, Muggsy, and Heroes of Democracy, Allen created and drew Argosy magazine's Men of Daring and Women of Daring. Homer Hoopy was a two-page story from writer-artist Fred Lotscher. Copyright The Associated Press. And Lotscher was a comic artist from Los Angeles who drew for Hearst newspapers. He drew originally the comic strip Cicero's Sap from 1921 to 1928, later working on Homer Hoopy. Jerry Iger gave us another strip, a one-page, called Bobby, copyright Eisner Iger.